It was a bright Tuesday morning when Elise Montgomery stepped out of her silver Mercedes and looked up at the stone building of Heritage Financial Bank. Her heart beat a little faster. After months of quiet negotiations, paperwork, and meetings, she had finally done it. She now owned a controlling interest in this bank. Elise smoothed down her simple navy blazer. Today, she had chosen to dress more casually than usual. No designer suit or expensive jewelry. Just a professional woman in modest business clothes coming to do some banking. She wanted to see how the branch operated when they didn't know the boss was watching. "Time to see what I've invested in," she whispered to herself, tucking a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. The large check in her purse felt heavy with importance. It was the final transaction from the acquisition process, completed just yesterday. Elise needed to deposit it, and she had purposely chosen to do it in person rather than through her financial team. As she pushed through the heavy glass doors of the bank, cool air rushed to meet her. The bank was busy but not crowded. People stood in neat lines, waiting for the next available teller. Soft music played in the background, mixing with the sounds of quiet conversations and clicking keyboards. A security guard stood near the entrance, a tall white man with graying hair and a badge that read Frank. He gave Elise a quick glance but didn't smile or greet her. Moments later, when an older white couple entered, Elise noticed the guard straighten up and offer them a warm "good morning" with a friendly nod. Interesting, Elise thought, making a mental note. She joined the line and used her waiting time to observe. The bank was well maintained but showing signs of age. The carpet was slightly worn in high-traffic areas. 2 of the 6 teller windows were closed. A sign about new mobile banking features looked outdated compared to competitors' offerings. "Next customer, please," called a young female teller with blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Elise approached the counter and smiled. "Good morning." "Morning," the teller replied without looking up from her computer. Her name tag read Jessica. "How can I help you today?" "I'd like to deposit this check, please," Elise said, sliding both the check and her ID across the counter. Jessica's eyes widened when she saw the amount on the check. Her fingers froze over her keyboard, and she glanced up at Elise with new interest, her gaze moving from Elise's face to her simple clothes and back again. "One moment, please," Jessica said, her voice suddenly higher. She pressed a button on her phone. "Mr. Dawson, I could use your assistance at window 4, please." While they waited, Jessica avoided making eye contact with Elise. Instead, she busied herself straightening papers that didn't need straightening. Elise remained calm. This wasn't the first time someone had underestimated her. At 42, she had spent 20 years climbing the ranks in the banking world. As one of the few black women in high-level banking positions, she had learned to expect these moments and use them as opportunities. A tall man in his 50s approached with confident steps. His gray suit looked expensive but slightly too tight around his middle. A gold watch flashed on his wrist as he extended his hand to take the check from Jessica. "I'm Richard Dawson, the ranch manager," he said with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It seems we have quite a substantial transaction here." As he looked down at the check, then up at Elise, his smile faded slightly. Little did he know, he wasn't just meeting a customer. He was meeting his new boss. Richard Dawson held the check between his fingers as if it might bite him. His eyes darted from the large number to Elise's face and back again. The branch manager's smile had completely disappeared now. "This is quite a substantial amount, Ms. Montgomery," he said, his voice lower than before. People in line were starting to notice the unusual attention being given to this transaction. "Yes, it is," Elise replied calmly. She had expected this reaction. In her 20 years in banking, she had seen it countless times. "The funds are from a business acquisition that was completed yesterday." Richard's eyebrows went up. "You purchased a business?" The doubt in his voice was clear as day. In a manner of speaking, Elise said, keeping her voice pleasant. She could have explained further, but decided to see how Richard would handle the situation without additional information. This was, after all, a test of how the bank treated its customers. Jessica, the teller, shifted uncomfortably beside Richard. She seemed to sense the tension building, but didn't know what to do about it. "Well, Ms. Montgomery," Richard said, clearing his throat, "we have certain protocols for checks of this size. I'm sure you understand." His tone suggested he didn't think she would understand at all. Of course, Elise nodded. I'm familiar with banking protocols. Richard didn't seem to register her comment. He was too busy turning the check over in his hands, examining it as if searching for signs of forgery. May I see your ID again, please? He asked, though Jessica had already verified it. Elise took out her driver's license and handed it over. Richard studied it carefully, comparing the photo to her face with obvious suspicion. And do you have any additional identification? He asked. By now, the line behind Elise had grown longer. A few customers were whispering to each other, watching the scene unfold. An elderly white woman shook her head in disapproval, though it wasn't clear whether she was disapproving of Elise or the manager's treatment of her. I have my passport, Elise said, reaching into her purse. She maintained her composure, though inside she was taking note of every detail of this interaction. She handed Richard her passport, which he also examined with exaggerated care. And what did you say was the source of these funds again? Richard asked, as if she hadn't already told him. A business acquisition that was finalized yesterday, Elise repeated patiently. Richard nodded slowly. And what business was this? Elise noticed he wasn't asking these questions with curiosity or friendliness, but with doubt. She also noticed that Jessica was watching her manager with growing discomfort. It was a financial investment, Elise said simply. Richard drummed his fingers on the counter. I see. And who was the previous owner of this business? Heritage Capital Partners, Elise replied, watching Richard's face carefully. A flicker of recognition crossed Richard's face. Heritage Capital Partners was the parent company that had previously owned this very bank, but he didn't make the connection yet. I'll need to verify this check, Richard said. It's standard procedure. I understand, Elise said. Please go ahead. Richard turned to Jessica. I'll handle this in my office. Ms. Montgomery, if you'll come with me, please. Elise nodded and followed Richard through the lobby. She could feel the eyes of customers and employees on her back as she walked. Some looked curious, others judgmental. One young black teller watched with particular interest, her eyes showing a glimmer of understanding about what was happening. As they approached his office, Richard walked with the stiff posture of someone who was certain he was about to catch someone in a lie. He had no idea that the woman following quietly behind him could determine his entire future at the bank with a single word. Richard's office was small but neat. Awards and certificates covered one wall, showing his 20 years in banking. He gestured for Elise to sit in a chair across from his large desk, which he walked around to sit in his leather chair. The power move wasn't lost on Elise. Now then, Ms. Montgomery, Richard said as he placed the check flat on his desk. Let's talk about this check. Elise sat with perfect posture, her hands resting calmly in her lap. What would you like to know, Mr. Dawson? For starters, it's unusual for an individual to come in with a check of this size, he said, his tone suggesting she had done something wrong. Especially to deposit it in person. Is there a bank policy against depositing checks in person? Elise asked. Her voice remained even, but her eyes were sharp and observant. Richard shifted in his seat. No, but... Or perhaps there's a policy against depositing checks over a certain amount, she continued. No, there isn't, Richard admitted. But we need to be careful. There's been an increase in check fraud lately. Elise nodded. I understand the need for security. How would you like to verify the check? Richard seemed surprised by her reasonable response. He had expected resistance or nervousness, signs of guilt. Elise showed neither. Well, we can call the issuing bank, he said, reaching for his phone. That sounds like a good approach, Elise agreed. Richard paused with his hand on the phone. Unfortunately, our verification system is temporarily down today. Elise raised an eyebrow. The phone system is down? The special line we use for these verifications, Richard clarified quickly. It's a secure line. I see, Elise said, though she knew this was a lie. Then perhaps we could use a regular phone line. I'm happy to provide the contact information for the issuing bank's verification department. Richard's mouth tightened. That wouldn't follow our protocols. What would you suggest then? Elise asked. The safest option would be for you to return when our system is back up. Perhaps tomorrow or next week, Richard said, already starting to slide the check back toward Elise. Elise didn't reach for it. That's interesting. The young man I saw at window 2 was depositing what looked like a business check just before I came in. I didn't notice any issues with verification then. Richard's face flushed slightly. Each situation is different, Ms. Montgomery. In what way is my situation different, Mr. Dawson? Elise asked directly. The question hung in the air between them. Richard seemed caught off guard by her directness. The amount, he finally said. The amount is different. I see, Elise said. And if I came in with proper documentation about the source of these funds, would that help move this process along? Richard's relief was visible. He clearly thought she was bluffing. Yes, of course. If you have supporting documentation, that would be helpful. Elise reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder. Would the final acquisition papers for Heritage Financial be sufficient, or perhaps the transfer of ownership documents showing that I now own 51% of this bank's shares? The color drained from Richard's face so quickly that Elise almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He started, his voice suddenly hoarse. Elise Montgomery, new majority shareholder of Heritage Financial, she confirmed, placing the documents on his desk. Which means this branch, your branch, is now under my ownership. Richard stared at the papers, then at Elise, then back at the papers. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. From outside the office, a light tap came at the door, and Jessica peeked in. Mr. Dawson? There are customers waiting, and they're asking. She stopped mid-sentence when she saw Richard's pale face and Elise's calm smile. Is everything okay? Jessica asked nervously. Everything is fine, Elise answered when Richard couldn't seem to find his voice. Mr. Dawson just realized who he's been speaking with. Jessica stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes moving back and forth between Richard's pale face and Elise's composed expression. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. I'll come back later, Jessica stammered, starting to back away. Actually, Jessica, please stay, Elise said kindly. Since I'm new here, I'd like to meet more of the staff. Jessica looked at Richard for guidance, but he seemed unable to speak. He was staring at the ownership papers on his desk as if they might disappear if he looked away. Jessica, this is Elise Montgomery, Richard finally said, his voice strained. She's the new owner of Heritage Financial. Jessica's eyes widened in surprise. Oh, I didn't. We weren't told about any change in ownership. The paperwork was just finalized yesterday, Elise explained. This check that Mr. Dawson was concerned about. It's from the final transaction of the acquisition. Jessica looked at the check on the desk, then back at Elise with new understanding. A slight blush crept up her neck as she realized how they had treated their new boss. Oh my goodness, Jessica said. I'm so sorry about how we... No need to apologize yet, Elise interrupted gently. We have a lot to discuss first. She turned back to Richard. Starting with your verification procedures. Richard cleared his throat, desperately trying to regain his composure. Ms. Montgomery, I want to assure you that we take security very seriously here at Heritage Financial. The steps I took were only to protect the bank's interests. Were they? Elise asked. Because from where I was sitting, it looked very different. Before Richard could answer, there was a commotion outside the office. Through the glass wall, they could see customers watching and staff whispering to each other. Word was spreading quickly. It seems news travels fast, Elise observed. Richard stood up suddenly. Let me make an announcement. I can introduce you to the staff properly. Not yet, Elise said firmly. Please sit down, Mr. Dawson. We're not finished here. Richard slowly sank back into his chair, looking like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. Jessica, Elise said, turning to the teller who was still standing awkwardly by the door. Would you please bring me the deposit slip for my check? I still intend to complete my transaction today. Right away, Ms. Montgomery, Jessica said, hurrying out of the office. When they were alone again, Elise leaned forward in her chair. Mr. Dawson, I'd like you to be honest with me. If I had been a white man in an expensive suit, would you have questioned my check the way you did? Richard opened his mouth to deny it, but something in Elise's steady gaze made him stop. He looked down at his hands. I was following procedures, he said weakly. Were you? Elise pressed. Because I've been in banking for 20 years, and I know the procedures. What you did wasn't procedure, it was prejudice. The word hung in the air between them. Richard didn't deny it, but he didn't admit it either. "I've been managing this branch for 8 years," he finally said. "Our fraud detection rate is one of the best in the region." "And how many legitimate customers have you turned away in the process?" Elise asked. "How many people like me have you made feel unwelcome or suspicious for no good reason?" Before Richard could answer, Jessica returned with the deposit slip. She handed it to Elise with a nervous smile. "Thank you, Jessica," Elise said. She filled out the form quickly and handed it back with her check. "Please process this deposit now." "Yes, Ms. Montgomery," Jessica said. "Right away." As Jessica left again, Elise turned back to Richard. His face had moved from shock to fear. He was realizing that his job might be on the line. "Ms. Montgomery," he began, "I hope you understand that I will discuss your future with the bank tomorrow," Elise interrupted. "But first, I want to see the rest of my branch." Elise stepped out of Richard's office with her head held high. The entire bank lobby fell silent. Every employee and customer turned to look at her. Some faces showed curiosity, others showed embarrassment, and a few showed respect. Richard followed behind her, his confident stride from earlier now replaced with uncertain steps. His face was a mixture of fear and shame. "Everyone," Richard announced, his voice slightly shaky, "I'd like to introduce Ms. Elise Montgomery. She is the new majority owner of Heritage Financial." Murmurs spread through the lobby. A young black teller's eyes widened with surprise and what looked like pride. An older security guard straightened his posture. Customers whispered to each other, some looking impressed, others confused. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson," Elise said, her voice clear and strong. "I'm pleased to meet all of you, and look forward to working with this branch and the entire Heritage Financial family." Jessica, who had returned to her window, was explaining something to her co-workers in hushed tones. They kept glancing at Elise with amazement. "Perhaps you'd like a tour of the branch," Richard suggested, trying to regain some control of the situation. "Yes, I would," Elise agreed. "But first, I'd like to make sure my deposit has been processed correctly." Jessica quickly spoke up. "I've taken care of it personally, Ms. Montgomery. Your deposit is complete. I can print a receipt for you right away." "Thank you, Jessica," Elise said with a warm smile. As Jessica printed the receipt, an elderly black woman who had been watching the scene approached Elise. "Excuse me," the woman said. "I couldn't help overhearing. You own this bank now?" "Yes, ma'am," Elise confirmed. "As of yesterday." The woman's face broke into a wide smile. "Well, praise the Lord. I've been banking here for 30 years, and this is the first time I've seen someone who looks like me in charge." Elise shook the woman's hand. "Thank you. I hope I can make you proud." "You already have just by walking in here," the woman said, squeezing Elise's hand before returning to the line. Richard watched this exchange with a complicated expression. He seemed to be seeing something he had never noticed before. Jessica brought over the receipt and handed it to Elise. "Here you are, Ms. Montgomery. Everything is in order." "Thank you," Elise said, checking the receipt before tucking it into her purse. "Now, Mr. Dawson, I believe you mentioned a tour." Richard nodded and led Elise through the lobby toward the back offices. As they walked, Elise greeted each employee they passed. She asked for names and job titles, showing genuine interest in each person. The employees' reactions to Richard had changed dramatically. Where before they had shown respect and perhaps a little fear, now they seemed uncertain about his standing. Their eyes kept moving to Elise, wondering what changes she might bring. In the break room, they found 3 tellers eating lunch. They jumped to their feet when Richard and Elise entered. "Please, don't let me interrupt your lunch," Elise said kindly. "I'm just getting to know the branch." After Richard introduced them, one of the tellers, a young Latina woman named Maria, spoke up. "Ms. Montgomery, is it true that Mr. Dawson didn't want to deposit your check?" Richard's face turned red. "That's not exactly." "Yes, it's true," Elise interrupted calmly. "And that's something we'll be discussing as a team. How we treat our customers matters, regardless of how they look or what they wear." Maria nodded, looking relieved. "I'm glad you're here, Ms. Montgomery." As they left the break room, Elise could feel a shift in the atmosphere of the bank. News of what had happened was traveling quickly. The looks she received were changing from surprise to respect. Richard was noticeably quieter now. The reality of the situation was sinking in. He had discriminated against his new boss, and everyone knew it. His future at Heritage Financial hung in the balance, and only Elise could decide what would happen next. After finishing the tour, Elise and Richard returned to his office. Elise closed the door behind them and took a seat across from Richard's desk. The bank manager sat down heavily in his chair, looking like a man waiting for a judge to announce his sentence. "Mr. Dawson," Elise began, her voice calm but firm, "let's talk about what happened today." Richard nodded, his eyes fixed on his desk. "Ms. Montgomery, I want to apologize for the misunderstanding earlier. If I had known who you were—" "That's exactly the problem," Elise interrupted. "Your behavior shouldn't change based on who you think I am." Richard looked up, surprised by her directness. "Tell me," Elise continued, "how many large checks have you personally verified in the past month?" Richard thought for a moment. "Perhaps a dozen." "And how many of those customers were black women?" Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I don't really keep track of that." "I think you do, even if you don't realize it," Elise said. "Banking is built on trust, Mr. Dawson, but that trust seems to depend on what a person looks like or how they dress." "That's not fair," Richard protested, some color returning to his face. "We have procedures." "Procedures that you apply differently to different people," Elise pointed out. "When I was waiting in line, I saw you approve a large business check for a white man in an expensive suit without any special verification. No questions about where the money came from. No suggestions to come back another day." Richard fell silent. He couldn't deny what she was saying. "I've been in banking for 20 years, Elise continued. "Do you know how many times I've been asked to provide extra identification? How many times I've had to explain where my money comes from? How many times I've been made to feel like a criminal for simply trying to do my banking?" "I didn't mean to make you feel that way," Richard said quietly. "Maybe not consciously," Elise agreed. "But that doesn't change the impact of your actions." Outside the office, they could see employees trying to look busy while sneaking glances toward them. The whole branch was wondering what was happening behind the closed door. "Are you going to fire me?" Richard finally asked, the question he'd been dreading. Elise considered him thoughtfully. "Do you think I should?" Richard looked surprised by the question. He expected anger, not a chance to reflect. He started, then stopped. For the first time that day, he seemed to really think about his actions. "I made a mistake, a serious one." "Yes, you did," Elise agreed. "But firing you won't solve the bigger problem." "Which is?" Richard asked. "A banking culture that sees some people as trustworthy customers and others as potential criminals based on how they look," Elise explained. "That's not just a Richard Dawson problem. That's a Heritage Financial problem. And now that it's my bank, it's my problem to fix." Richard looked relieved but confused. "So, I'm not fired?" "Not today," Elise said. "But things are going to change around here, Mr. Dawson, and you have a choice to make." "What choice?" he asked. "You can resist those changes and eventually find yourself looking for another job," Elise said plainly. "Or you can be part of the solution. You can help me make Heritage Financial a bank that truly serves all its customers equally." Richard considered her words carefully. For the first time, he seemed to be truly listening. "I want to be part of the solution," he said finally. "I really do. But I'm not sure I know how." Elise smiled slightly. "That's the most honest thing you've said all day. And it's a good place to start." 3 weeks had passed since Elise Montgomery walked into Heritage Financial and changed everything. The bank was buzzing with activity on a Monday morning as she entered the main doors. This time, the security guard, Frank, greeted her warmly. "Good morning, Ms. Montgomery," he said with a genuine smile. "Good morning, Frank," Elise replied. "How's your grandson doing with his college applications?" Frank beamed. "He got accepted to State University. First in our family to go to college." "That's wonderful news," Elise said. "The bank's scholarship committee will be meeting next week. Make sure he applies." Inside the lobby, Elise noticed the changes immediately. New signs welcomed customers in 3 languages. The tellers were a more diverse group than 3 weeks ago. Most importantly, there was a different feeling in the air, more relaxed, more welcoming. Richard Dawson approached her, looking different from the nervous man she had confronted weeks ago. He stood straighter, and there was a new thoughtfulness in his eyes. "Good morning, Ms. Montgomery," he said. "The team is ready for the meeting." "Thank you, Richard," she replied. "How did the training go on Friday?" "Better than expected," Richard admitted. "The bias recognition exercises were eye-opening for many of us." Elise nodded. "They usually are." They walked together to the bank's conference room where 15 employees waited. Some were from this branch, others from nearby locations. All looked up with respect when Elise entered. "Good morning, everyone," Elise began. "Today marks 3 weeks since we started our changes at Heritage Financial. I want to hear how it's going, the good and the bad." Jessica, now promoted to Customer Service Manager, spoke first. "The new verification procedures are working well. Every customer goes through the same steps, no matter who they are. It's actually faster overall because we have clear guidelines." Maria, the teller from the break room, added, "Customers have noticed the difference. Mrs. Johnson, the elderly black woman who banks here, told me yesterday that she's never felt so respected in a bank before." One by one, the employees shared their experiences. Not all were positive. Some customers complained about the new procedures. A few even left the bank, but most stories showed improvement. When everyone had spoken, Richard cleared his throat. "I have something to share too," he said. "Last week, a man came in with a large check. He was dressed casually, and my first thought was to question him extra carefully." The room grew quiet. Everyone knew Richard's history with Elise. "But then I caught myself," Richard continued. "I realized I was making assumptions based on how he looked. So I followed our new standard procedures, the same ones we use for everyone. Turns out he was a local business owner who had just sold his company." Richard looked directly at Elise. "He's now moving all his accounts to our bank because he was impressed with how professional we were. No special treatment, just respect." Elise smiled. "That's exactly what we're aiming for." After the meeting, Elise walked through the bank, stopping to talk with employees and customers. She paused by the customer service desk, where a new sign hung on the wall. It read, "At Heritage Financial, we judge you by your character, not your appearance." Richard joined her, looking at the sign. "You know, when you first came in that day, I thought you were going to destroy my career." "And what do you think now?" Elise asked. Richard thought for a moment. "I think you saved it, and made me a better banker, maybe even a better person." Elise nodded. "That was always the goal, Richard. Not just to change policies, but to change perspectives." Outside the bank's windows, a new customer approached. A young black man in casual clothes. Both Elise and Richard watched as Frank the security guard opened the door with a welcoming smile. 6 months had passed since Elise Montgomery first walked into Heritage Financial with a check and walked out as the recognized owner. Today, the bank's staff gathered in the grand ballroom of the City Hotel for the company's quarterly meeting. The room buzzed with excitement. Over 200 employees from all 12 branches filled the chairs. Many had heard the story of Elise's first day, but few had met her in person. Richard Dawson stood at the side of the stage, reviewing his notes. He looked different now, more relaxed, more authentic. The past 6 months had changed him in ways he never expected. At exactly 10:00 a.m., Richard approached the microphone. "Good morning, everyone," he began. "For those who don't know me, I'm Richard Dawson, manager of the downtown branch. 6 months ago, I made the biggest mistake of my career." A murmur went through the crowd. Most had heard rumors about what happened, a few knew the full story. "Our company owner, Ms. Elise Montgomery, came to my branch to deposit a check. I didn't know who she was. I saw only a black woman in casual clothes with a large check, and I immediately became suspicious." Richard paused, letting his words sink in. "I questioned her. I doubted her. I suggested she come back another day. I did everything except provide the service she deserved as a customer." The room was completely silent now. "What happened next changed not only my career but my entire perspective," Richard continued. "Instead of firing me, Ms. Montgomery chose to teach me. She chose to use that moment to transform our entire company." Richard gestured to the side of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the owner and CEO of Heritage Financial, Ms. Elise Montgomery." The crowd erupted in applause as Elise walked onto the stage. She wore a stylish business suit, her confidence visible in every step. She shook Richard's hand before taking the microphone. "Thank you, Richard," she said with a warm smile, "and thank you all for being here today." Elise looked out at the sea of faces, diverse faces from all backgrounds and communities. 6 months ago, I walked into a bank that I legally owned but didn't feel welcome in, she began. Today, I'm proud to say that Heritage Financial has become a model for inclusive banking in our region. She gestured toward screens around the room that displayed the bank's latest numbers. Our customer satisfaction scores are up 42% overall. Among minority customers, they've increased by 67%. New accounts have risen by 28%, and employee satisfaction has improved by 35%. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. "These numbers tell an important story," Elise continued. "When we treat everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of how they look or what they wear, everybody wins. Our customers win, our employees win, and yes, our business wins too." Elise invited several employees to the stage to share their experiences with the new training programs and policies. Each story showed how small changes have made big differences in their daily work. Finally, Richard returned to the microphone. "We've created something special here," he said. "What started as my worst day has become the beginning of our best chapter." Elise rejoined him on stage. "The work isn't finished," she added, "but we've proven that change is possible when we're willing to learn from our mistakes." As the meeting ended, employees lined up to meet Elise. Among them was Jessica, now a regional training coordinator, teaching other branches what she had learned. "Thank you for coming to our branch that day," Jessica told Elise when it was her turn, even though it was uncomfortable. "Sometimes the most uncomfortable moments lead to the most important changes," Elise replied with a smile. "Besides, I didn't just get a bank that day, I found a community that was ready to grow."